okay? Very, very small program. This actually runs if you run it. There's a couple import statements I dropped off technically. But,
so it won't run just like this. So if you're a hacker, don't use this.
But this is a very, very simple program. All it is doing is initializing a logger, as you can see with the logger equals logger manager get logger. All that's doing is setting up the logger. And then you have this function. And all it does is it calls logger.info. And developers use loggers like this all the time. They're going to call logger.info on different variable names, different things, trying to keep track of, let's say, users trying to visit the application. Maybe they want to know more about the browser you're using. Maybe they want to know what kinds of APIs they're trying to get. In this case, it's an API. So the problem with this is that all it takes to be vulnerable is to use the logger. That's it. Logger.info right here is all it takes to be vulnerable if you have a vulnerable version of Log4j. So this is why it's so ubiquitous and such a problem, is that these lines of code logging, developers use this logging framework all over the place, all over Java. So there's going to be, when we talk about this is going to be a problem for months, there are going to be new ways. This is a header example. There are other examples where, a vulnerable version of Log4j might be running the logger to find more about like a form you're filling out, or find more about, how many characters in your username. There's so many things you could log and so many ways you could exploit this. So the reason I have this pointed out here, X-API version, and I'll go, this slide is very similar to the one before it. See how I have here user agent circled? That could be x.api.version. And this is an actual example, by the way, that I ran myself. One of the first things we did as a company, after building signatures and making sure that we had our clients watching for this, was to set it up ourselves and try to understand more about how this works. And it's unfortunately dead simple. Really, all I had to do was call something with the X API version, and I used that vulnerable code and ran it in a container, and it was completely owned. All I had to do was one crafted exploit, one evil LDAP server, and it was game over.
And he did this in a sandbox in a protected environment.
Yes,
So don't do this on your own. We're just pointing out how easily it could be done. And then also, when we do our analysis, we can look for those behaviors. That's an important aspect of what we do, because then we want to find the underlying ways that we could detect this.
Yeah. So you imagine, if your vendors have the Log4j library, and they say they can't patch it. Well, okay, maybe they're saying that it's, the logs aren't going to be able to be utilized in that way. That might be true now, but let's say they patch something. Let's say code changes at all. There's another iteration on that code. Well, the developers use the logging framework again to log something. Now you might be vulnerable. Every time a new release of something comes out, you may be vulnerable again. And that's why it is so important to understand where Log4j exists in your ecosystem. And unfortunately, that's not trivial.